Whoosh is Stephanie! I'm losing my mind. I've only had coffee this morning and no food, so my caffeine rush is off the charts. Okay, I wanted to get something documented. Language learning experiences. I watch a lot of language learning vloggers. Sorry, I'm getting comfy here. I watch a lot of language learning vloggers, and they talk about their previous language learning experiences. And although I talked about my what would I say? My history of language teaching and studying language learning, I haven't really talked about my in-classroom language learning much until this point. And so I want to focus one video on my awful language learning in a classroom, and then maybe one or two videos on the stuff that changed my mind about language learning and got me really excited about it, despite the fact that I still had a decade of not progressing very far in any given language. Just like my about videos, or about section says in this YouTube channel, I am the suckiest language learner known to man. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with this channel, is I want to get to a point where I finally get a second language under my belt in a way that I feel like I'm fluent and can figure things out in the language in and of itself. That's not necessarily an HSK level in Chinese. That's more in a confidence level and a being able to use the language you have to find out how to say exactly what you want kind of level. And so there's no real number for that. So yeah, here we go. Oh, so I want to be able to get to that level so I can be an inspiration to people who suck at languages also, learning languages also, because there's plenty of examples out there in the world of people who are very good at learning languages and either found the method that was right for them early on. I'm not in a hurricane, I've got the fan on if you see some weird movement going on in my hair. Anyway, there's plenty of videos and things, and if you want some, just let me know, ask me in the comment section. I'll refer you to some of the trillion really inspiring polyglots that I follow that are doing all kinds of amazing things and have learned languages for years and find all kinds of techniques that work really well for them. There's lots of those folks out there, but I want to be the other side of the people that have struggled and struggled and struggled and finally got through. And I can't be that person for you until I get through, in a way, until I'm through the language, or at the level of the language that I feel I'm super confident in. And that, I'm guessing, is going to take me at least a couple of years. But I'm willing to track that progress, because when I get there, not if, when I get there, I want people to find this channel and to watch the stumbling and to know that it's not a linear process. And I want them to see the stumbling more than the success and the impressive output at the end, which I really hope I have. More so in reading. I can't wait to do, like a year from now, to do reading videos where I'm reading stuff and showing you my screen, and where I'm talking about the content in there, and to turn my walkabout videos into more of what's happening in that area and what is there and how it connects to the script and all that kind of stuff. And I know that the stuff I see in my walkabout videos isn't exactly super intellectual crap, I get that, but there still might be cultural tidbits in how things are phrased. And that's the part that I really, really enjoy, and that I can't wait to be a lens for you. But I've got a long way to go, and I've got a lot of work to do. So that's part of that. So let's go back. My first language learning experience. We can't include the Italian at home, which I never learned. So we're going into the classroom of German. In high school, I had to learn a language. Actually, it started in 8th grade. We could do 8th and 9th grade, or we could do 9th and 10th grade. We had to do 2 years in my high school of a foreign language. I chose 8th and the 9th because I heard that learning a language, and the language classes specifically, were a nightmare and really hard and taught really badly. And as critical as teenagers are, they were right. So our choices were, at the time in that high school, Hempfield High School, class of 90. I'm so not excited, but I'm saying it anyway. Excellent school, but didn't fit my personality. Anyway, here we go. So my choices were French, Spanish, and German. I didn't want French because the kind of people that were attracted to French and that took French that I could see in the previous people in previous years and things, and the people that were excited about signing up for French, seemed very kind of snooty, show-offy. I'm not talking about the French language, I'm talking about the people in my high school, junior high and high school, who were attracted to the language. They seemed kind of snooty, kind of like philosophically inclined, and just not very fun. They seemed pretty serious in an over the moon kind of artsy way. I love arts and humanities and cultural stuff, as you know, especially if you follow my podcast at all. And Lord help you if you follow this and my podcast. You're so sick of me! But anyway, point being, it just didn't seem like a crowd I'd really want to be stuck with for 2 years, because we would start at the same time, so we'd be in the same classes with the same group of folks for 2 years. And as much as I didn't really click with most of my high school classmates, sorry guys, but y'all knew this, I really, really didn't want to be stuck in a language classroom with a difficult subject, which is part of the problem. It was a subject, not a tool. I'll talk more about that later. So I didn't want to be stuck in a classroom with folks that had that kind of more serious mentality. So then there was Spanish, and I can say this because my parents were a minority. My parents came over from Italy to the US way before Italy and Italian were sexy. They were treated very, very, very badly. So much so that I don't have a lot of stories that they told us about their immigration to the US. But the few stories that they did tell us were pretty awful. How people treated them, how they teased them. They were the other of the time. And there are plenty more that came before them. There are plenty more that came after them. And they, to be fair, earned their whiteness somewhere in the 90s, at least the first generation did, and so now everybody just thinks that I'm white, and I have no idea that I've seen that kind of discrimination. Fine. But how this fits into my language learning is that at the time, in the mid to late 80s, most of the Spanish speakers in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is where I was in junior high and high school, were the other of the moment. They were a lot of the lower income, poor immigrants, migrants, what have you, that came over into the area and got really low paying jobs, and everybody thought they were low status and they were stupid, and of course they weren't. Of course they weren't. They were just the people that were seeking opportunities that were better than everywhere else, just sort of what I'm doing from the US to here, although my situation I cannot compare to theirs completely. That's a very broken analogy. But it was incredibly low status. And at the time, I think I was picking up on, I'm coming from this environment where the people that I'm from and are looked down upon, and the people, and a lot of the reaction of my teachers growing up towards me and any difficulties I had with reading, which was a lot, and writing, which was a lot, and language, which was a lot, even in my quote-unquote first language, which everybody refused to admit wasn't my first language. It's so complicated. I did get a lot of the stigma of my parents being immigrants. And so at 15 years old, 14, 15 years old, I think I somehow picked up on that, and Spanish, and the people that spoke Spanish, and this is a long way to explain that. I don't think I wanted to have the burden of another other language experience. I understand that there are people in Spain that people go, oh, mainland Spain is so beautiful, it's a great vacation spot, and that is not like a low-class society and whatever. And I'm not meaning to demean people who come from Latin America. I actually, that's where I fell in love with Spanish years and years later, ironically, but not. If you've been there, you understand the attraction to the culture and the language down there. It's so crisp and clear, and the people are so friendly, and it's just such a really awesome environment. However, let's be frank, in the 80s where I grew up, that wasn't the case. There was no admiration towards people that spoke Spanish. There was condescension and rudeness, sheer rudeness. Not from me. I was too young to be discriminating yet, I think. I was enamored with other cultures. I would seek out international students and migrants and immigrants and people that had interesting accents because I wanted to know more about where they were from. I didn't realize that that was strange and that most people were ostracizing others, and I was attracted to others because I was such a misfit myself. So Spanish was off the charts. So I was left with German, which Although Germans can be serious, stereotype, 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 the people that seemed to be attracted to German in my high school seemed less serious. They seemed more methodical. They seemed more to have a weird sense of humor, and that seemed to fit my personality better. So I was stuck with German. Unbeknownst to me, German is a language that I do not, sound-wise, mesh with. But there I was, making a decision at 14 or 15, however old I was, that would stick with me for 2 entire academic years. This is a good time to mention that I was a really crappy student my entire way through K through 12. Actually, yeah, no, I was. At first it was accidental. I had reading issues and learning issues that I didn't know about, and I got really shameful about in elementary school, and that just turned into a disinterest in education and learning as a whole. Thank God I got into reading on the side via like children's science fiction, and that got me into books. So I would read a lot outside of school, but in school I hated it, hated it, hated it. Literally until I went to a friend's college campus after I graduated high school and saw that environment, went to a few of her classes and went, holy cow, there's another way to learn. And then I got addicted to education in a very different sense. However, this was not happening in junior high, and it certainly didn't happen the 2 years of my language school. What happened in the classrooms? Thank you for asking. I only remember, one, Ken Heitmueller, the bass player, and by bass I mean like bass cello, not bass guitar, who sat behind me. I played the cello, mostly last chair until the last year I played. Then I moved up to 3rd or something chair, but he was behind me. Him and Stacy something were behind me in the orchestra. Ken was also in front of me in this German class, and he was hilarious. Thank you, Ken. You saved me in German class. I don't even remember what he was joking about. I don't even remember if he knew I was listening to his jokes, but he got me through that, whether he understands it or not. So thank you. The other thing that got me through was how many times I was absent. Those 2 years of school, I was the kind of student who hated school so much that I went all the way to the end of the absences you were allowed, and then needed doctor's notes. So after I didn't want to go to school after that, my mom used to have to take me to the doctor and make up an excuse for me to get a doctor's note so I could go back to school without being reprimanded. I'm not even sure what would have happened if I hadn't had doctor's notes in those times, and let me tell you, it was not a good day at home when I did those times after I went to get doctor's notes without having a real reason to not be at school, except for I hated school. So the absences and Ken saved me. Why did I hate these classes? 1, I hated classrooms. 2, my teacher, especially the second year, the first year, I remember the textbook. I remember doing exercises, grammar exercises in the German textbook, which was big and heavy and awkward and really good for people that learn through doing grammar exercises. I'm not that person. I wasn't that person then either. I remember doing those exercises in class. I remember very rarely listening to the German language, except for what German my teacher would say. That was the only real German input we got, other than our really bad pronunciations, when, she would call on us after we did our individual grammar exercises to awkwardly say the things for the first time without having heard them, without any input, to say them out loud in front of the entire class. Anybody remember teenagehood being awkward? Yeah, me too. That made it even more awkward to speak a very difficult language in front of your peers when you've had barely any input on the sound of the language. We may have had more input than I remember. Ken, if you remember and you're seeing this for some ungodly reason, go ahead and leave a comment below. Right, so there's that. The second year, I had to get approval because I had like a C or something at the end of the first year, and if you had below a B or something, my high school was on a 5-tier system. 5 was an A. 3.5 or 4 was a B, like it was that kind of GPA system. So a C was not a regular C in a 4.0 system. That's how crazy my high school was. So I had a C, so I had to get her approval, my German teacher's approval, to go on to the second year. And she, I will never forget this, said to me, "It's a shame that for students like you," and then I don't remember the end of the sentence. I just remember her looking at me, sighing, and saying, It's a shame that for students like you, and then she reluctantly signed the form and accepted me into her second year German class. For students like me. Ugh! How unmotivating is that? Yes, I was a crappy student, but she was not the best language teacher for someone like me. Again, if you were grammar-based, you would probably really like her class. The second year, she taught just in German. Not a lick of word from what I remember was in English, which for someone who barely scraped by the first year made it even more of an isolating language learning experience. Again, I remember the textbook. Don't remember anything else. I remember at some point her talking about language exchange programs if you had certain grades in the class. And I remember thinking, you mean person, why didn't you tell me at the beginning of German 1? I would have actually worked my butt off to be able to do a language exchange program for a year in a different country, away from the town I didn't like and the high school I didn't like. I would have loved to do that. That would have actually inspired me to figure out a way at 14 or 15 years old to learn the language come hell or high water. But she was telling us at the end of German 2 when we had to apply if we had the right grades. But she was saying this to the whole class, and a fair number of us didn't have the right grades. So I felt a bit gypped and lied to, and not really, and it just being kind of a trick. Like, you're allowed to listen to this great program you can't apply to, because we haven't inspired you enough, and you haven't inspired you enough. And I'll take credit. I didn't do a lot of work in that class. I hated that class. I hated language learning. I hated the sound of the language, mostly because it was coming from our awkward mouths. I can't say that I'm drawn to the language now when I hear it in its full form, but it sounds a lot better than 14-year-olds saying it without much practice. And keep in mind, this is in the 80s, pre-internet. There may have been language CDs at the library, but honestly in high school and junior high, do you go seek that stuff out? I mean, I didn't have any tools. I didn't have anybody around me that spoke many languages except for the people like my parents who came from a place where they spoke another language and they had to learn English. And they, again, because of their shunning when they got to the US, didn't really talk about their language learning methods. My dad was 12, so I'm guessing his method was immersion. Immersion and humiliation, which is an awful, awful way to learn, but they both got incredibly fluent and were at least bilingual. I think my mom is multilingual. Well, I know she is, because she does speak Albanian, but I think she spoke a few other languages in addition to that. I don't remember exactly what they were. I think they were mostly European Romance languages. Anyway, point being, I was so demotivated from the beginning, and my teacher didn't help with that, and high school and teenagehood, and so all of these factors. I barely got through this first language learning experience. It's a miracle that I gave languages a second chance at university later on, which was also a requirement but a very different experience, but I don't want to go into that in this video because that's when things turned, and that's when it got interesting, and that's when I saw that I still didn't realize it was going to end up being a career for me. That didn't happen until much later. But I really was turned off by this first experience. Many things of what I didn't do in my language teaching classes later on were reminiscent of what I hated in that first language classroom. And to be fair, I've seen a lot of language teachers teach different languages. I really have, not just English. And comparing that German teacher to them, I don't think she did an awful job. I will take responsibility for being a stubborn teenager who didn't understand her own language learning style yet. And this is part of why I think part of language learning, if you're going to do it in a classroom, should involve understanding language learning and understanding how individual it is, and understanding the ups and downs of it so you push through those plateaus, even the ones that come early. And there's things that aren't explicitly expressed in language learning classrooms. I feel like, and I felt like at 14, either you're good at language or you're not. And I feel like that's something that our culture, if not many cultures, perpetuates. You're either very good at learning languages, and so you just pick them up all the time because you're very good at it, or you're not, and you just fumble constantly and you're fearful of going anywhere that doesn't speak the language you know because you won't be able to do anything, which is so not true. I have maneuvered with charades in more places than I would like to count. But I will eventually when I finally do my geography video. My geography video. Anyway, the point is, that was an awful experience, and I will take credit for participating in the awfulness. But I do think that that classroom experience represents a lot of what's wrong with not just high school language classrooms, but language classrooms in general. I think there's a lot that happened there that still happens in language classrooms. And there's a lot of innovation that's going on. So if you have examples of motivating language classrooms, by all means leave it in the comment section. I'm not saying that all language classrooms are like this. Although I do hope that everybody has their own Ken to keep them amused during the struggle of language learning. But what I am saying is that the things that were awful about that language learning experience are still happening, and I think a lot of them don't need to happen anymore. And I tried to stomp some of them out in my own language classroom, and some of them are just inevitable because of the structure and the curriculum and different things like that. So some things we can't get rid of, but a lot of things we can. And I think once I started teaching language, I realized how much can be changed, and I started going on a crusade to try to help change it. And then I realized the limitations of the classrooms in general. And so now I'm more on an individual internet crusade, but I have to get to a certain level in my current language learning in order to triumph and take on others and help others find their method. I don't know if that's where I'm going. That just came out of my mouth. Interesting. Anyway, so yeah, my crusade is changing, but it's still language learning for the masses is very possible. Of course it's very possible. There are large parts of the world where people grow up multilingual, and they don't go learn a first language and then go, oh, I'm just not good at languages, and stop. There's huge swaths of the world where people grow up just learning other languages around them. Like, they grow up with multiple languages. We're asking what's your first language. It's sort of a tricky question because they grew up with multiple languages and there's no first. And so that first language question is sort of ridiculous because there were a few as their first language. And I'm super jealous of those people because they don't have this block like I'm just not good at languages. They just speak and learn and function and communicate. And that is a really beautiful mindset to grow up with. I understand that a lot of those places it's a survival tool, but can we have that kind of viewpoint in other places where it's not just meant to be a survival tool? Do we have to think you're either good at languages or you're not? And I really hope that that's something that is on its way out. And if you are, for some reason, a high school student watching this, and you're taking a language course, tell me, is that still happening in language classes? Are they still, in high school, are they still really excruciating? Or is there this idea now where if you just keep going, you'll learn it? And so has it changed from this kind of excruciating environment? I really hope it has. And I'm sure even at the time that I was taking these classes, there were other classes in the US that weren't like this, other classes globally that weren't like this. Again, there's innovation. There's been innovation in language learning the whole time that there's been awful methods in language learning. What I'm hoping changes is that the majority of language learning stops being so unapproachable, stops being so judgmental, and stops being so forgiving of people that give up when there's a challenge and just says, oh, you're just not good at it, try this other thing. No, 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 no. We need different perspectives. That's why the name of this channel is Changing Scripts. Well, right now it's still my name, but it will be Changing Scripts as soon as I figure out the Google-ness of changing that. Because it's not just learning a new language, it's looking at things from within a different language and seeing different viewpoints. And in the world, here's my soapbox, we need to view things from different viewpoints. A huge shift in empathy and understanding comes from other viewpoints. And that really happens when you have to look at the world through a different script, through a different language. Off the soapbox. I really appreciate your comments, suggestions, questions. Please, by all means, ask me any questions you wish, and leave your comments about your language learning in any sort of classroom context. Let's not restrict it to high school. I'd be very excited to hear your information below. I still have a few comments to reply to. I'm literally sitting here with a wristband and ice soaking the other wrist because I was a bad person yesterday and I had a train delay and I was on my phone the entire time during the 45-minute train delay, and of course my wrists hurt today. You have to rest them until they're better, I keep telling myself. Not just for a day, until they feel better and then you jump back on doing the activities that make them bad. This sucks. Anyway, wah. I appreciate you watching this, and I look forward to your feedback, comments, suggestions. Sure, why not? I'll take anything. Throw it this way, but gently and kindly. Thank you so much. Sajien.